Hello, everybody. My name is John Harris, and I'm the co-chair of Climate Action Brookline. I want to thank you for attending our 2022 Environmental Forum. We have some very interesting speakers today. This event is being broadcast live and is being recorded by Brookline Interactive Group. I'd like to thank Ann Tice and Ian of BIG for their assistance. Now, again, a very interesting meeting planned for today. First, we'll begin with a quick update of some ARPA projects that CAB has been working on. And then we will get to Rich Rosen, a theoretical physicist and contributor to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and Brookline resident, who will give us an inside story on the brand new update of the IPCC report that was just issued a week or so ago that's been in all the papers. Then we'll hear from Mike Sandman, candidate for the Brookline Select Board. He'll give us a sense of his environmental priorities, and he definitely wants to hear about yours. And then we will hear from Stephen Ehrenberg, who of the one of four school committee candidates who has done a heroic job. Steve is in England right now and has logged in from England to join us at this meeting, and that is fantastic. Now, there are four school committee candidates. We had earlier heard that two of them had important other commitments and unfortunately couldn't make it. And then yesterday, we just learned that the fourth candidate, the daughter of the fourth candidate, was first in labor and then had given birth. So she has gone to New York to take care of that very important and fantastic business. So thank you for Stephen Ehrenberg for shouldering the burden of the school committee for tonight. So after our speakers, we have several advanced questions that we'll ask of our speakers, and then we'll have plenty of time for your spontaneous questions at the moment. So we'd like to begin with Susan Martin, co-chair of Climate Action Brookline, to give us an update on the ARPA projects that she has been working on. Susan.
Thank you, John. So this will be a very brief update. As most of you know, the ARPA funds are available and we have submitted a proposal for an energy coach to help small businesses in Brookline make changes and improvements that will green their businesses and also lower their energy costs. We started this proposal. It was then taken over by the town sustainability director, which is fantastic. It has been submitted and it's asking for about $290,000 over the course of 3 years to fund the effort. There is a meeting tonight, a review meeting that is starting at 7 o'clock tonight. I do not know at this point how the proposal is being viewed. Perhaps I'll hear some tonight. The first round of proposals was closed on March 18th, I believe was the date. There will be a second round of proposals that will be accepted. And right now, the Zero Emissions Advisory Board has asked me to help them with a proposal for induction plates and induction cooking for low-income residents here in Brookline. So that's the update.
Susan, quick question on that. I thought I was hearing you say that or imply that the Energy Coach proposal has been part of that first, what they call first slate that they're going to discuss tonight. Is that correct?
I don't know if they will actually get to discussing it tonight. This is a public hearing tonight. I don't know how far or how much they are going to be able to get to all the proposals. There are many proposals. I was hoping to give you a number of how many there were, but I didn't do that. It's if you go out and look, there's 263 pages of proposals out there, which I think represents about 80 or so proposals. So they have a big job.
Yeah. Have they announced when they're going to announce the winners, I guess, in the first slate, the first draft?
I have not heard that. Okay. I have not heard a date for that.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So we are now ready for our first speaker, Rich Rosen, updating us on the IPCC report. Rich, take it away.
Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome to all my old friends and colleagues from CAB and other places. As you may have remembered, last Monday, the IPCC issued what's called the sixth assessment, AR6, the sixth assessment that they've done over the last 30 years on climate change mitigation issues. Now, each assessment, including the sixth, has actually three parts. The science part was from Working Group 1 that it came out about 6 months ago. The second part, Working Group 2, is on adaptation and impact, which came out about a month ago. I think at the end of February, maybe 6 weeks ago, which is a very interesting and a fairly new report in terms of its content. I've heard that that's improved a lot. And then last Monday was the Working Group 3 report, which is on mitigation. And mitigation, of course, means how to prevent too much additional climate change beyond what we already experience. Now, the Working Group 3 report from the fifth assessment, the prior assessment, came out in 2014. I'm sure a lot of you saw it then, but you probably don't remember that it was already 8 years ago. Now, the report you may remember that came out since then was the report that came out after the Paris Treaty was agreed to. And in fact, I think the town of Brookline, right, has officially in some capacity signed on to the Paris Agreement. Now, that report came out in October 2018. So we're talking, what, three and a half years ago, if I'm counting correctly. And it's that was called the Special Report on 1.5 degree scenarios. And the reason it was titled that way was because the Paris Agreement, you may remember, committed the nations of the world to try to keep the temperature increase. And by that, I mean the global temperature increase, which includes land and water surfaces. It's not just land, it's land and water, to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the 19th century level, if that small an increase was possible. And you remember they said, and the treaty says, that certainly the temperature increase has to be kept below 2.0 degrees Celsius, but the world was going to try to keep it as low as possible, below 2 degrees, and hopefully no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, as you may know from prior IPCC reports and US government reports, the very bad news is that the world is already this year at about 1.2 degrees increase. Okay, 1.2 compared to, we're trying to keep it at 1.5. So that may cause you to worry, as it should. And in fact, Brookline, this area of the East Coast, is already at about 2.2 degrees Celsius, which is almost roughly 4 degrees Fahrenheit. 4 degrees Fahrenheit compared to the 19th century level. Now, in fact, contrary to what you may have heard, climate change was very mild, and if I could use that term, until 1978 or so, till the late 1970s. So in fact, most of the change has occurred since the 1970s, right? That was that 45 years or so. And the climate change impact on temperature, at least, really took off in the 70s. So if we could go back to the 70s, we'd be in good shape, but we can't. Now, as I said, the world average includes land and water, but as any of you, I know from common sense, I'm sure, the heating over the land is always greater than heating over the water, the oceans, right? The oceans have a large heat capacity and tend to cool the air near the oceans, right? But land gets hotter faster. And so that's one reason why Brookline has a greater increase at 2.2 degrees Celsius. Now, the other thing that the press often doesn't report, but just is simple physics from high school, is that the low temperature of the day always goes up higher and more than the high temperature of the day from climate change. Okay, and I'm sure you all have probably experienced that very clearly now in Brookline, where you see that we almost never get the kind of cold winter night temperatures that we used to. It's almost never below zero. And 40 years ago, it was often below 0. And now it's hardly ever even below 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's always the cold temperatures early in the morning are always going up faster. And as I say, that's the simple greenhouse effect, literally, if you know how a greenhouse works. And that's why the climate change is often called, heating due to the greenhouse effect. Now, the other thing that's important to know is that the new report that came out last Monday really has almost nothing new, I would say, compared to the special report that came in October 2018. So if you had, memorized that report, you won't have to read the 3,000 pages of the new report. Actually, as we were discussing earlier, I don't recommend that you read the executive summary, or what's called the summary for policymakers of this new report. I find the summary for policymakers very incoherent. I recommend you read all or some of the technical summary, which is 150 pages or whatever it is. And that at least has some nice charts and figures. So don't read the report itself, which is 2,600 pages. Read the technical summary. Now, what I would say, what's new, of course, is that we're 3.5 years farther into climate change since the last report from October 2018. So that means that the baseline temperature is higher, and I just told you what that is for the world. That's 1.2 degrees Celsius. And we're trying to put the brakes on in terms of mitigation to prevent additional increases of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, right, to go higher. And we want to try to slow that increase down because it's still increasing, and we want to rapidly decrease the greenhouse gas emissions as fast as possible. Otherwise, of course, there's no hope to keep the temperature at 1.5 degrees, nor even 2. Now, 2 degrees is certainly seen by scientists as, a disaster zone. So we really, don't want to get that high. Right now, the increase in temperature around the world is about 0.12 degrees per decade, 0.12. So that means even if you just extrapolate in a very simplistic linear way from the past couple of decades, we'd be up over 1.5 in three decades. Okay. And as I said, Brookline's already higher. So what the IPCC has done in prior reports is developed a very simple concept of a carbon dioxide budget. Now, you may know that carbon dioxide is the major greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, but it only contributes about 2/3 to 3/4 of the warming, okay? And one good thing about carbon dioxide, at least, is it's very soluble in water. So in fact, 93% of it gets dissolved in the oceans and lakes, but mostly oceans, okay? If we didn't have so many oceans, we'd have much faster climate change, much faster greenhouse warming. So the good thing is 93% of it is in the oceans. But the bad news is, of course, that the carbon dioxide in the oceans itself has a major impact on marine life, and in particular coral reefs, both between the warming and the presence of the increasingly acidic oceans, because carbon dioxide plus water is an acid. Which tends to dissolve shellfish and things like that, which we have to worry about. So getting back to this concept of a carbon dioxide budget, so looking at the calculations of how fast the Earth is warming as carbon dioxide becomes a higher percentage of the atmosphere, it's fairly straightforward to point out, as the IPCC does and updates in this new report, that the budget for the future, but this is a future starting in 2019 when the report ends, the budget starting in 2020 is only 400 billion tons more that can be emitted. Now that's more than can be emitted to try to get the temperature increase to stop at 1.5 degrees. Okay, so 400 billion, keep that number in mind, 400 billion. Now, presently, the world is emitting a little over 40 billion tons a year, okay, say 42. So you divide 42 into 400, and what do you get? You get about 9 years, right? So if present level of carbon dioxide emissions continued, right? No increase, no decrease. If it just continued the way it was, we'd hit 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in about 9 years. So that's why people like Greta Thunberg and many of you say we're in a crisis, right? The crisis is there's not much time. And that's why the IPCC said last Monday and other times, we have to start decreasing emissions immediately. And of course, when you're doing computer modeling, you can start the curve going down immediately, but in the real world, you can't. But we have to do it as fast as possible. Now, of course, every time we talk about what's possible, you get a million objections that it's not possible, right? We can't decrease that fast. And we'll get to that in a second when I talk about just a simple way of seeing what Brookline needs to do. Okay, so we have a 400 billion ton budget and 42 billion. So depending on how fast the 42 goes down or up or stays the same, you can easily figure out with a little piece of graph paper, right? By when the world needs to get to zero emissions for carbon dioxide. Okay, now if you had a straight line down from now to the 0 point, right, it would give you roughly twice the 9 years, or about 18 years, right? So, you know, roughly if you could start with a linear decrease right now for the entire world for carbon dioxide, we'd have to get to zero in around 2040, you know, in round numbers, right? Now, you've often heard commitments to get to zero. Of course, people talk about net zero, right? And the net is a very unclear world, which I won't even get into. They talk about net zero by 2050. Well, that's too late, okay? 2050 is just plain old too late, given what's happening. It's already 2022. You see, the years go by 1 year every year. It's very fast. So we have to adjust our calendars to thinking about getting to zero in about 20 years. Okay, so what does that mean for Brookline? Okay, well, Brookline is really simple. First of all, it's pretty well organized. It's fairly small, 60,000 people. It's highly educated. It's fairly rich. Even within the context of the US, it's rich, and certainly compared to people in the rest of the world, it's very rich, etc. So if Brookline can't get to zero use of fossil fuels by 2040, obviously this is all going to be a disaster for the rest of the world, because they're not going to do it if Brookline can't do it. And the rest of the US has to, of course, won't do it as fast as Brookline should do it, and I hope will do it. Now, what does Brookline have to do by 2040? It's, again, pretty simple. We have 18 years. It's very easy to have a mitigation plan that gets you to zero, right? Zero is a very simple number. So we basically have transportation emissions in Brookline and building emissions, right? Most of the buildings are, in fact, residential buildings. And we've talked about this endlessly in past years. So we have 18 years. We have to get to zero. That means a 6 percentage point drop each year, right? Roughly. And that doesn't mean 6%, because 6% tails off, right? It's 6 percentage point. We want a nice linear drop. So we have, of course, we won't be starting next year, but we should start within a year or two. Now, what does that mean? To get transportation emissions to zero means, right, we get rid of course, all the gas stations, etc. We have every vehicle be electric, and 6 percentage points more each year. So we have to somehow structure various financial incentives. We have to structure the rate at which we install electric charging stations for vehicles, certainly at a high enough rate to encourage at least 6% of the population to get electric vehicles each year. Now, in my opinion, that will be the easy part of mitigation, to the extent that, again, Brookline folks are pretty knowledgeable about the need for electric vehicles already. They're already starting to buy significant numbers, not enough, of course, but significant numbers. And we're already starting to put charging stations into the right places. But of course, for apartment houses and for other places where people have cars, the selectmen will obviously have to require private property owners to do this. Okay, and I'm not going to give a lecture about that, but it has to be required. These things cannot be left to the quote market. It cannot be left to private individuals' decisions to do the right thing. It must be done. So we'll need lots of charging stations in private parking lots, lots in public parking lots, and then of course you have single family houses where people will be able to do it on their own decision making. Okay, so as I say, that should be easy, and let's hope we get going 6% a year quickly. I don't know how many cars there are in Brookline, but that means a lot of new cars that are going to be electric vehicles. And then we need all the buses and trucks and everything that drives into Brookline will have to say, you got to be electric. Now, obviously the state might not quite like us to say it that way, but we'll have to figure out how to coordinate with the state. Now, buildings obviously is going to be a lot harder, right? For many reasons. And I'll leave it to you to think of all the reasons, but we're going to have to convert 6 percentage points of every dwelling, apartments, houses, etc., to electric, space heat, cooking, and hot water, right, per year. Okay, so say there's what there might be 20,000 dwelling units in Brookline. Maybe that's too many, but let's say there are 20,000. All right, 6%. That's 1,200 units per year. Now, clearly, that's not going to happen next year. It's not going to happen the year after. But we need a plan, a coordinated plan between all the agencies, utilities, construction companies, you name it. We're going to have a plan to make that happen. Now, what is that going to require? Well, in my humble opinion, it's going to require closing off a lot of streets every year so that every building, every home, every apartment on streets, on certain streets, can be converted to electric, space heat, hot water, and cooking. Okay, now that also often should go along with better insulation, right? More energy efficiency in the buildings. They'll need new windows, new insulation, etc. This should all happen at once, right? It'll be far more efficient to do this all at once. The building shell, the building envelope, the windows, etc. So one way, in my view, of doing this is to do something like the following, which is very dramatic, but you may see its virtues at some point in the future. You inform, you have a map, you get a town planner to figure out which streets should be closed to traffic each year because of all the construction vehicles. Okay, and then you have about 1,000 homes a year, apartments, etc., being converted. Okay, so you need to figure out where all the construction workers are going to come from. This is a big problem, especially now. There's a shortage of workers to do anything, right? I can't even get my windows washed, and I'm sure you all have had the same problem. And of course, then you tell people, maybe say with a 2-year lead time or a 3-year lead time, you tell them that by the end of that 2 or 3 year lead time, they have to convert because you're going to shut the gas off. You're going to remove the gas pipes from the street. If you remove the gas pipes from the street, people will convert, right? Because they'll have no alternative. If you leave it to individual decisions, this will never happen, right? You won't have 1% converting each year or 2%. We need 6% year after year after year after year. Now, every building, every city in the world is going to face the same problem, right? They're talking about Germany now, right? Trying to get off Russian gas. Well, this is what's going to have to happen in every city in the world. So Brookline could be a leader in showing people how this could happen. Now, the good news is it's not a very high density town, right? It's not that high density. So we could do this. But as I say, you have to threaten people. You have to say, basically, you do this in 2 years or no gas. I don't know what the alternative would be. So I throw that out to all of you, to our leaders, our new political leaders, Michael, whoever, and figure out how we're going to get 1,000, 1,200 dwelling units each year converted to electric and off of gas. Now, of course, the first thing everyone will ask is, well, who's going to pay for this? Well, I'll ask you, who's going to pay for it? Should it be state tax break, town tax breaks, federal tax breaks? How much will Biden contribute, et cetera? I mean, these are big issues, but we're not going to hit the target if we don't do this, and the whole world has to get to zero. So Brookline's nothing special, but Brookline could be a leader. So that's about all I have to say. Nothing new. We all knew we had to do this, except now we have a fewer years to do it in.
Well, Rich, thank you very much. No holds barred. Wow, wow, wow. So I'll tell you what, Michael, that is the gauntlet is now thrown to you. So, get ready.
Okay. Thanks, John. Do you want me to tell you a little bit about my thinking along these lines and so forth, and then take some questions, perhaps?
Well,
Okay,
again,
so-
Michael, and then we'll hear from Stephen, and then questions after that. Yeah, but yes, please.
Okay. So I'm Mike Sandman. I'm the one and only candidate this year for Select Board, which is honestly a very strange feeling. I've been involved in a lot of Brookline matters for I think about 40 or 45 of my 47 and a half years here. I was on the board of the Community Foundation and was the chair in 1999 and 2000 when it really evolved into its current form. And then I was involved in I was a member of the Transportation Board and ultimately the chair. And I was a supporter of traffic calming and street improvements to make cycling safer. And I biked to my offices and as they moved from Harvard Square to then Kendall Square and then ultimately downtown Boston. But I have to confess that was only in good weather. The Green Line was the route other than that. I've been an advisory committee member and recently left the advisory committee and then you can't be a townwide candidate and advisory committee member. As a chair and as a precinct 3 town meeting member, I think I've supported most climate initiatives that have come from this group and others. And I have to confess, probably not all, but most. As I listen to Richard, it's a daunting, it's quite a gauntlet that he's tossed down here. I will say, in my own condominium association, I was one of the owners who spearheaded a push to install PowerPoints in our garage, and so I put my money where my mouth is because that came back to us to pay for. And so I'm going to give you a list. It's not an exhaustive list of what I hope the Select Board will do when I'm a member, and it represents my thinking, even though it's not a complete list. And as you'll hear, the themes are partnering and planning. So I think it's important for us to team up with other municipalities to get legislative action on an alternative building code that would allow cities and towns to require fossil fuel HVAC. That's what we tripped over with Article 21 a couple of years ago. We need to zone in town for smaller dwelling units and fewer parking spaces per unit. We need to tie the granting of permits to utilities, which are constantly doing repairs, whether it's natural gas leaks or work by the electric company, by Eversource in their grid. And so we need to tie the grading of the permits that they request to requirements that Eversource, for example, provide increased capacity to deal with the demand for electricity that's going to evolve over the next, 18 years that Richard's laid out for us, and for conversion of buildings to fossil-free building systems. And I want to thank Rebecca Mautner, who put that idea in my head when we talked maybe a month ago or so. We should have plans in the capital budget to convert town buildings to fossil-free HVAC over time, and include funds in the operating budget to improve the climate resiliency of the town's infrastructure. And I know that resiliency is not something that we've talked about or heard about here much, but some element of to some extent, climate change is here with an increase in temperatures, and we need to respond to the weather changes that we can see just to protect our own infrastructure. We should be partnering with other interested parties, towns, groups like you, in pushing the state to fund the climate initiatives that it's written into law. So public PowerPoints for electric vehicles, rebates for purchase of electric vehicles. There was an article in the Globe recently about how the funding for rebates runs out occasionally at the end of before the end of the year. And the rebates in Massachusetts are not particularly generous. They're currently $2,500 in tax credits. And then what do you do for people who don't pay taxes to the extent that they can use a tax credit? There should be some sort of incentive for people in that situation. And we have to build the costs of conversion to electricity into the town's budget. So those are all things that need to be done. And one thing that sometimes gets lost in this is equity. It's important to factor in measures that benefit and help the entire population move, not just people who can afford the out-of-pocket costs. So I'd like to hear from you on these kinds of things, especially, now, sure, but after May 3rd, if I don't seem to be giving climate change action enough attention, I want you to tell me that. There's a link on my website now that lets anyone sign up for a 30-minute Zoom call, and that link will remain in place. It'll probably be not on a campaign website, but a different one during my term in office, so that you'll have an easy way to get in touch face to face and without having to troop down to town hall. So conclude there. Let's have some questions and some comments from the rest of you. Go ahead.
Yeah, John, by the way, if I could just throw in a point, which I assumed you all realized was, of course, I assume on the supply side that the electricity is 100% renewable very soon. Hopefully that can be done by 2025 or so. So once that's done, then there won't be pressure running around getting people to sign up for green electricity.
Right, but you still need the additional capacity. And that I don't really know the extent to which Eversource and the utilities in general are planning for that. I know they're thinking about it, but there will certainly be an increased demand.
All right. Thank you very much, Michael. And now, if we could hear from Stephen Ehrenberg, and just in case folks who maybe signed in a little bit late, hadn't heard this, that Stephen is currently in England, and we are delighted that he was able to log in with us and speak to us tonight. So Stephen Ehrenberg, please.
Thanks, John. Can you hear me all right?
Can hear you fine.
Well, great. So thanks for inviting me to this. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Stephen Ehrenberg. I'm the father of two girls at Lawrence. Their ages 9 and 7. I was elected to the school committee last May, and I'm running.
Stephen, you just muted yourself.
I'll try not to do that again.
There we go.
So I'm running for the 3-year seat. I was elected last May. I'm running unopposed. So here we go again. I don't have too much to say to introduce myself with. I just want to share a story and then talk about the problem that I see in Brookline and what I hope the solution can be. In my real life, I work in international educational development, and that has meant for me working on US government funded projects in education in one or another corner of the world. And right now, for the past year, I've been the director of an engineering education project that is global and aims to help kids from underserved backgrounds become engineers. So I'm in England right now, and I spent much of the day observing one of the sessions of this program. It's for high schoolers, 16, 17-year-olds, to do some design challenges, basically take a local challenge and iterate their way to a solution. If they do enough of this and do enough college and career readiness modules as well, they get a scholarship to go into university to pursue higher education in engineering. Anyway, coincidentally, today's unit was about energy efficiency. And to set the context for it, the facilitator passed out some graphs about energy consumption overall and by fuel type. And at first, he passed out some heartening graphs, which shows, the growth of renewables, the growth of hydro. But then the kids quickly noticed that overall energy consumption is continuing to rise, and all the growth of the good stuff is by far outstripped by growth in coal and gas. And so that initial realization quickly turned to panic and horror, as it turns with youth who are going to have to face this for much of their lives. So I sat there listening to these 16-year-olds talk about rates of change and the value of electric vehicles and how useful that would be, and what other kind of infrastructure investments would have to be made for them to become more efficient. And I mean, my clear takeaway was that this stuff deeply, deeply matters to any slightly aware young person right now. And that's reflected in Brookline. I'm sure many of you know Roger Grandy, a BHS teacher. He surveyed BHS students to find out the extent to which climate change fears affect their ability to live their lives. And he found really high levels of climate anxiety among students. So I just want to start with that fact. That's just, we all know this. I got to look at it in the face today, so I'm feeling a little more urgency than I usually feel. I'm listening for. I really appreciated the opportunity to listen to that to your summary, Richard, of the report, and how neatly you boiled it down. Obviously, we're not going to meet any of the targets, and obviously, there's going to be terrible events as a result, or many more, much worse. I don't think anyone would disagree with me on that call, on that topic. So the question for me, someone who's working in education in Brookline, is so what are we going to do to help Brookline youth face the world in which this is happening? And I think there are terrific environmental education initiatives going on throughout Brookline. There are magazines being launched, there are enterprising teachers who are developing courses, there's outdoor education, there's gardening, there's composting, and all of this is being led by charismatic, enterprising individuals who will eventually burn out, and this activity will die with them unless they're taken over by someone else. All of these activities, they're not institutionalized, they're not mainstreamed. There's no major policy level support for them to continue in Brookline. Recently, the policy subcommittee developed a sustainability policy, which is a great start. So the problem is there's no support structure for these activities to continue. And I would say, Richard, as I was listening to you, that it's as important to get to zero emissions in Brookline as it is to prepare Brookline youth to face the world in which this is simply a fact of life. This is ecological collapse is the fact that they will face, and they need to be prepared, not just to mitigate it, but also to deal with the mass migration that occurs, and all the host of issues. I think about mass migration first, but the host of moral, ethical, legal issues, cultural issues that will face them. So that's the problem that I see when it comes to environmental education. So one of the responses that I was trying to foster was to try to create some entity under the school committee that would help coordinate, facilitate all of these initiatives. And it didn't really fly, in part because I think I was proposing an entity that didn't really make sense under the school committee. But what I want to share about this experience was the response of another school committee member as I was proposing it. He said, "What's the pressure we're getting from the community that this responds to?" And he wasn't saying it cynically. He was saying it because he wanted it to gain traction, and he was right. And that question has haunted me. I keep thinking, where is the pressure? Where is the pressure for an environmental education advocacy agenda? I'm not saying this critically of anybody on the call. You all are leaders in environment and environmental awareness in Brookline. But environmental education, I think, there isn't a loud, aggressive constituency demanding it, the way that there is a loud, aggressive constituency demanding data-driven literacy education. Their right to demand that literacy education. And I need help. I want all the groups that are working on climate action, climate justice, climate change in Brookline to put on their agenda that environmental education has to be a high priority. I want there to be more pressure on elected officials to make this happen, and to think about the fact that kids in Brookline are worrying about this every day and can be better prepared to face it as graduates of BHS. So that's my piece. I apologize if I'm a little more overwrought than I may usually be. I think it's the effect of talking to 16-year-olds all day who are genuinely panicked. So some of that seeped into my own more often calm demeanor. So thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to you all today.
Stephen, I'll tell you, I think your emotional investment in this is actually really impressive. So don't apologize for it at all. And I think, I'm sure I can speak on behalf of everybody involved in Climate Action Brookline and MOF and everything else. So good for you. Good for you. So I'll tell you what, Rich, yeah, you can give me some time to get to the first written question. Go ahead, Rich.
Okay, well, I thought that was a very helpful set of comments on education. Now, I know for myself for one, but I'm sure others too have volunteered in the past to like talk to people in schools and give a lecture in the high school or do whatever, educational work about the science and the economics of climate change as you feel would be useful. But we've never, in fact, been invited. But I'm not saying that I or any other particular person would be all that useful, but it seems to me some activity should come from all this on the strictly education level. But I hear you also talking about that kids need things to do, functionally. And so, maybe it sounds like a joke, but within a couple of years, I would hope that high school kids could sort of be hired part-time as part of these construction crews that are going to be, renovating houses and converting them to electricity and all that kind of thing. I mean, it could literally be a green jobs program for students in Brookline, not to speak of other places. But I would, certainly hope that as real action gets going, that we should think of green jobs not just for people that are unemployed, of which there are actually very few in Massachusetts right now, but students.
Thank you, Rich. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to scroll down there. In a second, I'm going to get to the major area of questions. But since we're talking about schools, there has been a concern about the lack of coordination between the town and the school system regarding environmental issues. A concern that environmental initiatives are not integrated into school programming, and they're therefore not being accessed by all students. That there should be more in the way of environmental clubs, gardens, farm to school programs, et cetera, et cetera. And Rebecca, why don't you add to that question if you can? Thank you.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. I think I totally agree with what Stephen just said. All the initiatives that we have right now in schools are just because teachers are committed to do stuff, or because we have volunteer parents, they do that. But there is nothing really to come from the district, from the institution. And I would like, I don't know if it's a question, I just leave it out there, it's more a comment. I would like to see more coordination between the town and the district. It cannot be that the town do their own thing in sustainability, environmental matters, and the schools do the other thing, but they don't talk to each other. It doesn't make any sense. We need to do this all together. And I love the idea, Richard, you say about the green jobs for high school students. I think that's really an amazing idea. We have in high school, we have kids that they learn how to cook. They have cooking classes. So why can't we have exactly the same for green jobs? So I think it's a great idea, but I would like to see the select board talking to the school district and do something together. And also, I think sometimes we send, how can I say it? We are all committed to this, but then we send the wrong messages always. So for example, we are all committed to green energy and whatever, but then when it comes to convert schools, for example, to zero emissions, then the talk starts and the money, and it's super hard. If we start, for example, talking about electric vehicles, which is great, but what about talking about less cars, just less cars? And we talk about closing streets, and oh my gosh, it's impossible, there's nothing. we talk about how important is farm to school and to have relationship with farmers here and to have less transport costs and everything. But then on the other hand, and the school lunches are like 20 minutes. So we always, we do one thing or we say one thing and we do the other. So I would just would like to really, direct the attention that there must be some coordination between the town and the schools, and we need to work together to tackle this. Otherwise, it's just going to be impossible.
Any response from our candidates?
I'm happy to. Oh, go ahead.
Well, okay. So I would say that we have a professional employed in town that to deal with climate change issues, and I think that the rational thing to do, and I'm embarrassed to say that I hadn't really thought about this, is to make that person and the staff support in the department available to the schools to do exactly the kind of coordination you're talking about. And I think, Stephen, if you want to speak to anything.
Yeah, Michael, I'll just add on that.
Yeah.
Just to add on that exactly. So I think, Rebecca, I think it's promising that that Werner's on this call. I'd love to hear your comments on this too, Werner. That the Zero Emissions Advisory Board is a reconstituted form of the Climate Action Committee, and directly is going to be advising the Select Board, and it will be liaising. It already is liaising with Tom Barrasso, the sustainability lead for the town, and I get to liaise with it as well. So there's already an entity that could provide some coordinating function, and I think that it could also be an entity that could be leveraged to create collaborative initiatives. So I think that's there, Rebecca. I think we could use that, and there's some. The problem, I think, is that there isn't strong demand that has to get met. I just come back to this in my head. I think about the pressure campaigns that have been mounted in other areas that have essentially forced government to respond, and I just don't see it around environmental education. I see a small group of passionate, committed parents, and I see a Green Caucus, and I see a Climate Action Group, and they themselves aren't coordinated. So just to boil this comment down, what I think is needed most is an expansion of a coalition in town. There are a lot of independent groups. These groups can unite around an advocacy as an agenda that has a couple of top priorities, like zero emissions and environmental education, but it hasn't really done that. And I think there's an opportunity for that. And I'm actually saying this optimistically, because I think the human capital is there, and it's super smart, like, my God, we have.
Stephen, you muted yourself again.
That's okay. I was rambling. I'll just stop there.
You mute yourself when you get overexcited, I guess. So, well, I'll tell you what, then what I'm going to do, there in fact is a question that came in about ZAB, and let me get to that. So we've heard some already, but here is the full question. What is your understanding of the newly configured Zero Emissions Advisory Board, which we call ZAB? We face a climate crisis. What is the role? What is that body's role? How would you envision ZAB working successfully and collaboratively on fossil fuel-free goals and climate agenda? With fossil fuel-free goals and a climate agenda-driven organizations like CAB and Mothers Out Front. Again, I guess a response from any of our speakers, I suppose, or Werner, you were, Stephen asked of you as well. So any ideas how this new group called ZAB, Zero Emissions Advisory Board?
Well, let me try to say something.
Thank you.
That both Rich's summary, reminding us, I've been avoiding reading that report, but it's good to hear it. We all know how bad it is, but sometimes we need a little more emotional response. And Stephen, the same thing, talking about 16-year-old. I know that where I am personally is I'm temperamentally kind of moderate and not particularly emotional. But what we need, I don't disagree at all that forming coalitions and organizing and planning it would be very helpful. But it seems to me the biggest thing that's happening with ZIAB is, in that sense, I feel like I'm lucky to be on it because I was on the SBCAC for a long time, and we accomplished some things. I feel like I personally accomplished some things, and all of us together accomplished some things, but we didn't do it with a lot of emotion and a lot of energy. And I was very pleased to relinquish the chair of that and hand it over to Jesse Gray, because he brings a level of emotion and urgency and toughness and willingness to challenge people to challenge business as usual, that I know I personally have a lot of trouble mustering. And I think that I think that's what, the 25, 26 of us that are in this group, all of us need to try to get in touch with, is the idea that maybe we don't have time to go to one more meeting, but maybe we do have time to talk a little more loudly at the next meeting we go to. I've been working recently on electric and town fleet. We passed a warrant. Jesse Gray again was the proponent 3 years ago of an article that made it clear that was a sense of town meeting that we shouldn't, if there's an alternative available, we should not buy one more internal combustion engine vehicle if there's a EV internal available. And yet one of the town departments this year is all set to buy a regular old Ford 150 pickup, even though you can see ads all over TV, or not all over, but most of their stuff. Even though Ford is making a big deal of this spring selling many Ford 150 Lightning all electric vehicles. We just can't let that kind of thing happen. We gotta, I think, just be a little more militant. Doesn't hurt to be organized when you're about that, but being militant first.
I'll just add on to that to say that I think I'm optimistic about ZIAB for a couple of specific reasons. Also, one, I think as much as I'd like to call for a broader coalition, we all know that environmental coalitions in particular can be very fractious. And I think by shrinking the Climate Action Committee to a smaller group that's more narrowly focused on a specific issue, zero emissions, it has a chance to move the ball forward relatively quickly. And I think the positive thing about that is that the experience of a win, I think, will naturally broaden the coalition, because people will see that things can get done and people will be attracted to a movement that's making some progress. So I think it's the right model for helping push change forward.
Mike Sandman.
Yeah, the question about, well, what should the board be doing? There are two things. One is that every once in a while, and hopefully not too often, but every once in a while, it's necessary to take a 2x4 and whack us, those of us who are dealing with the day-to-day stuff and get buried in it, whack us on the side of the head and say, hey, you've forgotten about this, and you're not planning for it, you're not doing it, this is a practical matter fast enough. It's going to take reminders to bring it to top of mind. There are other things that compete for attention. There's the routine stuff, the day-to-day stuff. There's a great deal of interest in making housing more affordable in Brookline. There's concern about racial equity. Those are valid concerns. And this competes for the attention of policymakers, of staff. Climate change competes, and it's important that it compete effectively. And so I think that one of the reasons that we have outside committees is to whack us on the side of the head with a 2x4 every once in a while. And I would urge you to do that, and urge ZIAB to do that. And I haven't got any doubt that Jesse will. I do think it's also very important to, once you wielded the 2x4, to get to the practical issues involved in what policies, what specifically actions need to be taken, how should they be financed, and so forth. Work with the staff, work with the elected officials to accomplish those goals. So, for example, the thing we were talking about before, programming in the schools that keep teenagers engaged with this, particularly high school students, but really all the way down to, go all the way down to kindergarten kids with programming. But keep kids engaged with this is that's a very practical thing, and it requires turning down the emotion and sitting down and actually working with the school department to do it. And those are two sort of parallel tracks that ZEAB has to follow.
Fantastic. Paul Harris, yellow hand.
Yes, I just wanted to respond to that, Mike. I think that we may be able to do all of these together, and it's not easy to do any of them, but it may actually not be so much harder to do all of them together. So climate change and affordable housing and racial justice and equity and the schools, education, employment of high school students. I'm thinking of this. This is such a big thing, the change that needs to take place, a real transformation. And so it's not a war. We're not worried about people bombing us right now, unless Putin goes crazy. But it's that kind of effort that we need, that we're going to really, as a community, come together. Everybody's going to have a role to play, and we're going to bring about this transformation. And part of that is developing a vision, which Brookline has been sadly missing, a vision of what we want as a community to look like, and to say, look, in 2040, this is what we want Brookline to look like. And then we can start developing plans for how to get there and get everybody in the community involved.
I know Rich has raised his hands first, but I want to get a quick word in that the unity of purpose and getting everybody together around the same set of ideas is certainly feasible. One of the things that the select board has been missing in the town operating budget is a glaring example of it, is that unlike the schools, I mean, if you open up the school's budget right at the beginning, the school committee's made it very clear what their objectives are, what their priorities are. That's not true of the town's budget. Instead, the staff puts, each member of each department head puts their particular objectives in. But the select board, to the best of my knowledge, at least in recent years, never sat down and said, what are we trying to accomplish here broadly? And how do we unify these various themes? And that is, as I said earlier, partnering and planning are the themes that I would emphasize. That really is the beginning of getting the select board to take the time to do that, is the beginning of that sort of effort. We did that. We had a couple of sort of education nights on the advisory committee when I was chair. I would love to see the same kind of thing happen with the select board.
Yellow hand, Rich Rosen.
Thanks. A couple of points. So, for example, take affordable housing as an issue. Okay. Clearly, we need more, but I always find the thinking in terms of how you're going to get to avoid affordable housing very fuzzy, but that's another story. But clearly, if we construct any new affordable housing, it can't use fossil fuels, period. Okay. In fact, no new building can use fossil fuels, or should. That's something the select board, even if we can't pass a resolution as we did a few years ago because the state somehow has a conflict. Number one, we need to get the state to change it. And number two, the select board certainly at least needs to coax people in the strongest possible way not to put fossil fuels in any new building, period. But certainly with affordable housing, that's just the way it has to be. Same with public housing, that has to be converted. But on the broader issue of an image of the town for the future, again, that's nice if the town has a separate image that it could develop relative to other towns or countries or whatever. But the world is together facing the climate change issue, right? This is not something that if Brookline succeeds or fails on, that's Brookline's success or failure. I mean, if the world fails in dealing with climate change, Brookline's going to have huge problems. And I don't think anyone thinks of it that way. I mean, I think people are relatively well off, relatively rich in Brookline, and they assume that their money will buy them out of any problem. And that's typical, and that's probably been true of the past, but it's not going to be true of climate change. If, for example, a hurricane wipes out half the, vacation homes on Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard, it's going to affect rich people. Okay. And, I generally feel that no one wants to think that there are going to be bad things happening in the future, but there are. No one wants to think there's going to be another recession or a stock market crash, but there are going to be stock market crashes, and some may accelerate due to climate change. So I don't think we should just think about Brookline needs a vision. I mean, it does, but it also has to link its vision to the rest of the world and say, look, this, the world can't function with climate change occurring. I mean, as we speak, right, there's if you looked at the weather forecast today, it says that there's, 1,000-mile long storm going through the central plains of the US that's going to generate a lot of tornadoes. Maybe the worst tornado so far in 2022. Okay, well, Brookline helped generate those tornadoes, so the devastation is going to occur there. Thank God we almost never have a tornado here. But we're responsible too. So you can't just say, well, we need a vision for Brookline. We certainly need a vision for the US, and we need a vision for the world. So
Yeah,
I don't think we should.
You're asking questions about a school committee member and a select board member and what we're going to do in Brookline.
I understand. And I'm telling you that you have to talk more like you're part of the rest of the world. Okay. The education of Brookline students is important, but it's not more important than climate change. You're going to have to flip some of these priorities. And if people are worried about education for the next 20 years in Brookline, that's absurd. That's not the biggest problem. Okay. You're going to have to start to think differently about priorities, period. I know
Richard,
who I'm talking to.
Richard, I'm really, first of all, Richard, I'm really enjoying the things that you have to say. Second of all, I at the same time, I'm confused about your model for change. So when you say we have to link with the rest of the world, I don't quite know what that means. To me, it seems that remains a lack of will and capacity in the world, including in Brookline, and the way to create that will and capacity to me is through education. If we at least could recognize, I hear you saying that it's going to be too late. If we just pass it off to the next generation, the world will be burnt to a crisp by then. But at the same time, I feel skeptical of our capacity to respond with the current level of urgency. It seems to me that most change happens as a result of external shocks that create a willingness to challenge the underlying value system that produces the status quo that exists. So I guess I see it as a portfolio that needs two essential investments. One, an immediate investment in building the infrastructure to withstand or to mitigate climate change, but two, to build in the next generation more capacity and will and leadership and resilience to take all this stuff on. So to me, and I'm not a politician in the town sense. I'm just an education professional who's volunteering for my local school committee. It seems to me as urgent to build that capacity and will as it seems to me to mitigate the nearest term effects.
Yeah, well, I agree basically with what you're saying, but let me give you an example.
Rich, excuse me.
Yeah.
We'd like to use the yellow hand just to keep it organized. And the next yellow hand is Werner Lowy. And Rich, if you have something to say, please raise your yellow hand. Thank you. Werner, please. Just unmute yourself, Werner. Yep, here we go.
I certainly agree with Stephen about how important education can be in getting people mobilized. I really wish I had more practical ideas of things to do at the same time, and I feel like I have too few ideas about local things. But Stephen, one of my challenges to you, one of my favorite people has always been John Dewey and his approach to sort of hands-on education, right? I mean, and I wonder if there isn't some way that in addition to just educating, we can get kids and older people, particularly kids, out there acting. If you start an environmental course, an environmental communication course where kids go out and knock on doors and convince people to put in air source heat pumps.
Richard, yellow hands.
Okay, so another idea of many possible ones. What if we, obviously I'm totally in favor of education, right? Everyone I know has a PhD. At any rate, what if you had a big sort of TV type monitor in every school that literally broadcast every climate disaster and weather disaster in the world, hour by hour, day by day. So as kids floated around the halls and looked at it, they would start to see that there is far more of a climate problem than probably even the most knowledgeable of them realized, because often they don't know what's happening in other parts of the world. So, you know, a concrete project could be undertaken to have a video screen, as I say, literally in every school in Brookline, especially the high school, and broadcast all the disasters and all the people dying from these disasters.
Thank you, Richard. Yellow hand, Mike Sandman, please.
I'm just,
Steve,
I'm wondering if I'm wondering if there's a mental health professional on the call who'd like to respond to that idea. So I want to come back to the point that Richard was making. Your Brookline it can't solve the problem all by itself. We don't exist in a vacuum. And we can't declare that, well, because we've reduced ourselves to zero emissions, that we're immune from climate change. Absolutely understand all of that. But again, the question is, what can Brookline government do? What can Brookline individuals do as a very practical matter? So what we can do is try to achieve zero emissions in Brookline by 2040, according to the, along the lines of your schedule. And that was a very powerful statement, that we have to take 6% of the base of vehicles and homes every year and convert them. That's a big, that's quite a challenge. And we also have to advocate in the state legislature for what the state can do, and at the federal level for what the federal government can do, which is a huge problem, a huge barrier. But what we have to start with is what we can do ourselves.
Thank you, Michael. Yellow hand, David Lescoyer.
Okay, thank you, Mike, for that comment, because I'm coming more down to where I am is what we can do or what we could be doing. And just to think about what would be involved in costs of converting 6% of the housing and looking around, at least around here, and housing this building built in the 19th century. A lot of our buildings built in the aughts and 20s of the last century. It's a massive job. I don't know if even the skills and labor exist, let alone the materials and the equipment. And where's the money going to come from? Certainly not from the Brookline coffers. We're limited by Proposition 2.5. We can barely keep ahead of our obligations. But there are things that the town has out there that it could do. We years ago already adopted a solar overlay district with the idea of building a substantial amount of solar within Brookline, like a megawatt. In Lexington, they've moved ahead with this. They have 3.3 megawatts already built, and it's actually generating revenue for Lexington. We haven't done even the things that are right in front of us at our doorstep, low-hanging fruit, and the value of doing those is actually contributing additional sources of renewable energy on the one hand. On the other hand, creating the climate. I mean, look, all of this is very idealistic. All of this has to do with changing attitudes and behaviors, which actually takes quite a long time. And part of what bringing that about involves is demonstrating its feasibility. I mean, I worked early in my career in community development in a third world country. And the strategy in agricultural development was to find a farmer who was willing to go ahead with a project, let him do it, let the other farmers observe the success of that, and then they become more interested in the project. Now that's what we have been doing in Brookline, at least a little bit with the solarized Brookline a while ago. And we need to continue with these micro things that we can actually do. And I would be interested in Mike's and Steve's comments along those lines. Thank you.
Michael or Steve as our candidates.
Well, that's that's very much what I was saying when I said we have to figure out what town government can do, because we can control that, at least to some extent. And we can't exercise quite the same control. Partnering with other communities is really important. Partnering with other groups is vital. If we send a home rule petition to the state legislature all by ourselves, the legislature, unless it's really something unusual, legislature sort of shrugs and it doesn't go to the top of the list. If we partner with the mayor of Boston, who is very interested in climate change, or says she is anyway, let's see. If we partner with Boston and with Cambridge and we go to the legislature with identical bills, that's a whole different, that'll get a whole different response. So it's very much organizing ourselves to get beyond, if we want to get our influence beyond the borders of the town and influence things more broadly, we have to team up with others.
Thank you.
Michael,
oh, Stephen, go ahead as a candidate.
Yeah,
Sure.
I just like to add on to that. First of all, Michael, I'm glad you're running for select board and I'm running for the education for the committee, because the task of those partnerships, I have no idea what it entails. But listening to you, David, I feel very aligned with the way you think about the theory of change. I feel like you articulated one that's a very early in how like USAID used to do work. It's like a more of an ugly American, that letter on Burdick book's theory of change, which says you identify the innovations and you support and scale them, and you make sure you're fluent enough in what it's like in that indigenous, among that indigenous population, so that you can identify those innovations and support them. And actually that's actually very similar to what I would like to see happen next in Brookline in education, because I think the enterprise and the initiatives and the proofs of concept are there. We have good courses, we have good outdoor education programs, we have good school gardening programs. The ideas are there. We don't need to generate the ideas. What we need is an infrastructure to coordinate, facilitate, and scale them up. And so that's the step that I think that the education side of the town should be taking next, and that it could take more easily if there were a larger coalition with a louder voice advocating for environmental education. So I actually very much agree with your point of view, David, I think.
Thank you. We haven't heard from Don Weitzman yet. So Don, let's go with you as the next yellow hand, and then Werner, please.
Okay. Thanks.
Whoops, Don, you froze for me anyway. I assume for everyone. Yep, and you're remaining frozen. Don, let's give you a minute to unfreeze. And meanwhile, if we could go to Werner, please.
So I think you can't solve problems by just throwing money at them, but how you spend your money does express priorities, and it can change priorities. So I would ask both our candidates here to address racism and climate change and affordable housing and schools on a better track. Would both of you support a major override?
Sorry. Anyway, did I
Don,
get lost there?
You did, Don, and we'll get to you as soon as the two candidates have had a chance to respond to Werner's question, okay?
Yes.
Don, put your yellow hand up again so I don't forget, please, though. But
Sure.
Meanwhile, Mike and or Stephen, the question has been asked of you.
The answer to the question, would I support a major override, is yes, and that's what is needed to do the things that we're talking about. And beyond that, it's a rather scary prospect, but beyond that, we're not paying people enough to work for the town to continue to attract the kind of people that we want to work for the town. And we have to raise pay as well. It's not going to be a small override like we have had in the past. We need to take a big bite, and we're doing that at the time that we're also going to be asking the voters to approve some major capital expenses for Pierce School and fire stations. So this is not going to be the seat that both Stephen and I are occupying they're going to heat up when it comes to dollars and cents, but it's the only solution. You're right. And as Richard said, we're not a poor town, or he didn't say that, but the money is here. We're going to have to dig into our pockets and pay it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Stephen, and then yellow hand Don, please. So Stephen, thank you.
Yeah, my answer is yes, without a doubt. I think we all agree that the town's fiscal situation is a mess, and Michael's really, I don't know why you're running for select board, Michael, but we also have the BFAC recommendations to start to implement and make more progress on also, and we need to get our town. This is out of my league, but suffice to say that the current situation is insufficient to support change without an override.
Thank you. Don Weitzman, let's give it a second try there.
Okay. I don't know how much of my question you heard before. Basically, I'm wondering about, we have a new town administrator eventually coming on board, and it strikes me that that is an absolutely critical position in terms of climate change initiatives, values, and so forth. And so, Michael, this is primarily a question for you, although I'd be interested to hear what Steve has to say. How do you see your role in filtering candidates for this position, or your relationship with the new town administrator vis-a-vis climate change?
Right. Well, climate change is certainly what we're looking for is somebody who has the same set of values and concerns that we have as a town. I'm sure that we'll find somebody like that among the candidates. What has happened with hiring recently is Mel Kleckner followed a policy of retaining a consulting firm to go out and look for applicants who fit the description, the job description that gets put together. That job description is really important. It has to include climate change. It has to include some of the other things that we've talked about, an interest in racial equity, and certainly, I mean, anyone who thinks that there are no racial barriers or in Brookline is just, they haven't got their eyes open. And so that's something that needs to be in there. We need to find somebody who is in tune with the contemporary concerns that we have. Interestingly enough, I know that there was a lot of yelling and screaming about appointing an outsider as a police chief, and God help him, he actually spent time in Austin, Texas, but he spent 30 years in Norwalk, Connecticut, and having met the guy, I would say he is in tune with contemporary issues. We need to do the same thing for a town administrator.
Can I follow up?
Please.
Relating to policies. I don't know, Michael, how familiar you are with the Collins report. Okay, well, there were like 7 recommendations on that were really presented as a package. We piecemeal kind of approached 2 or 3 of them. Would you be willing to commit to getting us further down the road to implementing the Collins report recommendations?
Yeah.
Thank you. You know, it is now 6:22. We're in our final 8 minutes. And in terms of the advanced questions, I would like to give David Lescoye in particular a chance. David, you had very specific questions about certain sites for solar electricity in town. The landfill site, the school roofs, and maybe a couple of others. And I wonder if you'd just like to be sure to ask those questions about those.
But I think I've already actually covered it in my prior remarks, seeing the immediate opportunities that are still on the town's doorstep to move ahead with those. And I think it's, on the one hand, there are all these ideas. On the other hand, there's the real, and doing the real helps to support us getting to the ideal. And so let's go on to the next thing. I was pleased with the responses that Mike and Steve made.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess, again, it's 6:23. We've got a fairly hard 6:30 stop time. And I wonder if any attendees have any final questions, and we may get to kind of final statements after another question or two. If you have a question, attendees, please just raise that yellow hands because I can't see everybody's screen right now. Okay. Oh, Rebecca, yes, please.
So I know that we've been talking about a lot of local issues, but I would really like to ask Richard more of a technical question about the IPCC. It's about one of the arguments that I hear over and over again, why we are not switching fast enough to renewable energies is because we don't have the capacity. And I would like to hear your thoughts on nuclear power. You talk about, for example, the example of Germany, that the problems that they have by switching from the Russian gas. But one of the major problems that they have is that they committed to close all the power plants. So I just want to hear your thoughts on alternative energies, or if it's totally backwards. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, yeah, I have very, very clear thoughts. I was one of the major people that testified against nuclear power plants in the United States through the 70s and 80s. But the major issue is cost. It's not that I worry personally that nuclear power plants are dangerous or whatever. But the costs just completely diverge. Nuclear power costs are still going up and up and up, and solar and wind are going down and down and down. So there's no need to consider nuclear power, period. I mean, the French say they're going to, the British say they may build a couple of plants, but they never put the cost in the newspaper articles. And the only plant that's recently being finished is in Finland. And, the cost is just astronomical. So compared to solar costs falling something like 90%, in the last decade, which actually is discussed in the IPCC report. There's a nice graph. There's absolutely no need for nuclear. When people talk about the problem of baseload power, if that word means something to you, nuclear runs, all the time, and solar and wind don't. That is a problem, but it's a problem that's much more easily solved again with number one, storage batteries, electric storage batteries, which we're going to have a lot more of course, which create their own problems of lithium and whatever, but storage is necessary. And there's another kind of storage which isn't discussed that much, which is hydrogen storage. Hydrogen as a gas. A lot of people talk about green hydrogen being made with renewable electricity. And of course, that's simple. You do it in high school, right? It's trivial to make hydrogen. So the key thing there is, again, both cost and where you're going to store it. Well, the good thing about hydrogen is it can be stored in tanks like natural gas is now. And if you need peaking units for the electric system, or even combined cycle units that can run most hours of the year, hydrogen is always a possibility in places that don't have much wind and sunlight. So we have to have a balanced system between hydrogen batteries, and the other thing is that I didn't mention, which is transmission grids. You didn't raise that issue either. It's absolutely essential. We're going to have to build many, many more transmission lines to equalize the power supply and demand across the country and the world. Okay, so Europe's talking about getting solar right from North Africa. That's again just going to be necessary. Now, another good way to deal with all this is to have much more efficient use of every energy form, right? Particularly electricity. So if you can improve the efficiency of all these end-use technologies that use electricity, then we have less of a problem because we have less demand for electricity in total. So efficiency is important, but nuclear, I'd say, should be out of the picture.
Thank you. Mary DeWart, last question, and then we will have time for brief final statements from our speakers.
Thank
Mary
you all
Dort,
so
please.
much. This has been a really informative session. Thank you, Michael and Stephen, for your thoughtfulness, and Rich for your commentary and insights. I'm really been prodded to think about the relationship, not just of policy, but of implementation, and that we have to identify what the solutions are. And the solution is to choose the right policy and figure out how to make it happen. And one of the good things that I'll pass around by email is the fact that we can't offer, change in solar panel installations. And, we have to have good policy, but we also have to have contractors who are trained to do that. And that we really need to add that to our agenda as climate activists. And I want to figure that out. And I hope anyone else will, and we could brainstorm ways to make that happen in Brookline. It's really important to have high school students get interested, but we really need trained installers for charging stations. We need trained electricians. We need trained solar installers and all of that. So that's just my point, that I hope that we as visionaries who are ahead of the curve can co-join these two agendas.
Yeah, Mary, have you talked to the union about that issue? Because they have to train the people.
Well, it's not just the union, but of figuring out in our articulation of solving the problems, of getting the discussion going better.
Let me just say, there is, before we kind of give candidates or our speakers a final wrap up, there is a chat from a person who joined us a little bit late, and about how these initiatives would engage youth and BIPOC individuals. And I would just advise that person, this entire talk is being recorded. The recording will be made available, and there has been extensive discussion earlier on about involving high school students, et cetera, in all of these initiatives. So
I would just quickly add on to that, though, that I
Thank
think
you.
that was from Luciana, and I think that's a great question. I think the area of climate justice education is one that covers a lot of the intersections between climate change and equity. And I think that, again, there's enterprising educators who are doing the work, who are kind of leading the way on this. When I started looking into it, I thought, well, how are we going to create this? But now I realize it's been created. It's just, again, it's a matter of coordinating and scaling. But I think the kids know that. Like when I talk to BHS students, they don't talk about climate change. They start by talking about climate justice. To them, it's already intersectional. They're not thinking about it as a standalone piece. They're thinking about the challenges that will arise for them and their friends when there are disasters or when their inequities are worsened. So same answer as before.
Thank you. Just a few minutes now for wrap-ups from our speakers. And I know, Rich, you will talk. Let's go with Rich last, because Rich will talk our ears off. But why don't we go with Michael Sandman first, and then Steve, and then Rich.
Right. So I want to echo what Stephen just said in response to Luciana's question. And earlier on, we did indeed talk about this. I commented that we have to factor in measures for conversion to electricity that don't leave people out who can't afford the out-of-pocket costs, and that's going to be a significant. It's going to be a significant issue, even in Brookline, where indeed we are a lot better off on average than most other communities. My wrap up is to remind you again what I said. When you think I'm missing something, you need to hit me. Well, you don't need to, really, not too hard. Hit me over the head with a 2x4 so that I feel it and wake up to something that I may be missing. All of us in office and public policy, whether we're volunteers, elected, appointed, or whatever, we do miss things. We get buried in the day-to-day details. It's very easy, and we need people to give us a good shake and tell you, "Hey, come on, look up, look at what's going on around you."
Thank you, Stephen Ehrenberg. Final comments.
Thanks, John, and thanks for convening this conversation. I had remarks prepared, but I actually just want to say one thing, which is that it's clear that this group alone has so much technical knowledge and ability and experience wrestling with these problems. I would just say, please stay engaged with the politics of these problems as well, because I think we need your help. I think we need your energy in advocating and your guidance for the youth movement that's coming up around these issues as well. We need to keep these coalitions connected at the very least. So that's it. That's all I want to say to conclude.
That is fantastic. And Rich Rosen, the worldwide overview, please.
No further comment on the world. But
Or
again,
whatever.
if I can play an educational role in Brookline, I'm happy to do so.
All right, fantastic. I think this has been a fantastic event, and I'd like to thank all of our speakers. And I'll tell you what, if you folks agree with me, let's see either a physical handshake or a one of those yellow hand claps or whatever we got. Okay, so I'm going to keep this actually open for a few minutes so I can catch everything that came in on the chat. But why I think at this point, Big, if you would like, you could welcome to stop the recording at this point. I think the official part of the meeting. Why don't we wrap that up? And thank you very much to our speakers, Rich Rosen, Mike Sandman, Stephen Ehrenberg. Thank you very much for all of the attendees. Thank you definitely for Ann Tice and Ian of BIG for coordinating the big part of this whole event. And this has just been fantastic. So very good. Onward, we'll keep working together. We'll keep coordinating and talking with each other, and let's solve this problem. Thanks to everybody.